All right. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep, deep into the world of decentralized finance, and specifically, something that sounds way more complex than it actually is, but stick with me. We're talking about liquidity pools.
And I'm excited to break it all down with you.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Now, before we dive into the nitty-gritty, let's take a step back. I think most of our listeners are already familiar with the concept of exchanges, right? You go to buy or sell your crypto, those platforms that are essentially the middleman in the transaction.
Right, they match your buy orders with someone else's sell orders.
Precisely. But, and this is where it gets interesting, decentralized exchanges, or DEXs, take a totally different approach. They ditch the order books altogether, and it's all thanks to these things we're talking about today, liquidity pools.
And they really are the backbone of DeFi as we know it.
So for anyone hearing about liquidity pools for the first time, where do we even begin? Imagine, I don't know, a giant pool. But instead of water, we've got, say, ETH on one side.
And maybe something like DAI on the other, just as an example, of course. That could be all sorts of token combinations.
Exactly. So you got these two sides, two different cryptocurrencies, and instead of matching individual buy and sell orders, this pool automatically figures out the price based on how much of each asset is in there. It's kind of like this self-regulating market.
And the key to that self-regulation is the automated market maker, or AMM. It sounds complicated, but really it's just a fancy term for a set of mathematical formulas that determine the price.
There's always got to be some math involved, right?
Well, it is DeFi after all. But don't worry, it's not as scary as it sounds. Let's take a really simple example. The formula XK. X is the amount of one token, Y is the amount of the other, and K is a constant. So if you buy a bunch of DAI, the price of DAI goes up relative to ETH to keep that K value stable.
So the pool always wants to stay balanced. Makes sense. But where do these tokens come from in the first place? Who's putting them in the pool to begin with?
That's where our liquidity providers come in.
Liquidity providers. That sounds kind of like a big deal.
It kind of is. They're the ones making these pools possible. See, anyone can become a liquidity provider by depositing or locking up their tokens into the pool. So in our example, they'd be putting in ETH and DI.
Okay, and what's in it for them? Why just lock up their crypto like that?
Yeah. Well, for one, they're helping create a more efficient and accessible trading environment. But even better, they get rewarded for their contribution. When you deposit tokens into a pool, you receive something called liquidity provider tokens, or LPTs.
LPTs got it. And what do those do?
Think of LPTs like, hosting a slice of a delicious pie.
A pie. Now you're speaking my language.
Right. As people trade, the size of the pie might change, meaning the total value of the assets in the pool goes up or down, but your LPT, that slice, it still represents your share of the pie.
So even though the overall pie might get bigger or smaller, I still have my slice.
Exactly. And here's the real kicker. Every time someone makes a trade in that pool, a small fee is deducted from the trade.
Wait, go back. So every time someone buys or sells using that pool.
A tiny percentage of that trade is distributed among all the liquidity providers.
So it's like passive income for just providing liquidity.
Pretty much. And the more you contribute to the pool, the bigger your slice of the pie, and the more you potentially earn from those fees.
Okay, now this is where I get a little hesitant. Because, in the world of investing, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Or free pie, I guess, in this case.
Yeah.
What are the risks involved in being a liquidity provider?
That's a smart question to ask. And you're right, there are always risks. One of the big ones with liquidity pools is something called impermanent loss. Sounds intimidating, right?
Really much so.
But it's actually not that complicated. Let me ask you this. Have you ever been baking a cake and thought, I wonder if I could unbake this cake and get all my ingredients back?
Can't say that I have.
Right.
But I see where you're going with this.
Right, so let's say you could unbake the cake, but the price of eggs and flour has changed since you put them in the oven. You might end up with more or less value than you started with, right?
Because the price of the ingredients changed while they were in the cake.
Exactly. And that's kind of what can happen with impermanent loss. The ratio of your assets can change while they're in the pool because their values are fluctuating independently.
So you might end up with, like, more ETH and less DAI than you put in, even though you still got your slice of the pie.
Exactly. But here's the thing. It's only a permanent loss if you withdraw your liquidity at a loss. If you believe in the long-term value of both assets, then these short-term fluctuations might not matter much in the grand scheme of things.
So patience is key.
Gotcha. And I imagine there are other things that could impact the value of your investment too, right? Like What if the price of one of the assets in the pool suddenly tanks?
Right. That's always a risk with any investment. And it ties into another important concept, price slippage. Ever notice how sometimes when you try to buy a large amount of something, the price jumps up because of your purchase?
Yeah, like if I tried to buy a ridiculous amount of, say, bananas, suddenly the price of bananas everywhere would skyrocket.
Exactly. And the same principle applies in liquidity pools. It's all about supply and demand. A massive buy or sell order can throw the balance off temporarily, especially if it's a smaller pool. So if I try to be a crypto whale in a kiddie pool, I might not get the price I was hoping for.
Got it. So we've covered the basics, but what does all this actually look like in the real world? What are some real examples of DEXs that use these magical liquidity pools?
Oh, there are tons of great examples out there. Uniswap is a big one. They were really pioneers in this space. SushiSwap is another popular one. And then there's Curve Finance, which focuses on stablecoins.
And are there any particular innovations or features that stand out to you?
Oh, for sure. One of the things that makes Uniswap so innovative is how easy they made it to list new tokens. You don't have to go through all the complicated and often expensive listing processes that you do on traditional exchanges.
So it really democratizes access for both developers and traders.
That's incredible.
It is, and it just goes to show how this technology is really disrupting the traditional financial system. Because when you think about it, these liquidity pools aren't just for trading. They're the foundation for a whole universe of DeFi applications.
Wait, say that again. What else can you do with liquidity pools besides just, trading crypto?
Oh my gosh, so much. Remember how we talked about earning fees for providing liquidity? Well, some people have figured out ways to maximize those returns by strategically moving their liquidity between different pools. It's called yield farming, and it gets pretty wild.
Yield farming. See, I told you there was a reason to be excited about this stuff. We're definitely going to have to do a whole deep dive on that another time. But for now, let's bring it back to liquidity pools. Just to recap for everyone, we've got these self-governing pools that are kind of like the engine behind the DEXs. They offer amazing advantages like constant liquidity and potential rewards for providers, not to mention the whole decentralization aspect of it all. But like with any investment, there are risks to consider.
Exactly. And you know what I think is really interesting? It's not just about the technology itself, but also the philosophy behind it. What if we could take these principles of decentralization, transparency, and open access and apply them to other areas of finance?
Now, that is a thought-provoking question. What could a more open and equitable financial system look like?
The possibilities are endless. It's a question worth exploring for sure.
Couldn't agree more. As always, we encourage you to dive in, do your own research, and see what this whole world of DeFi is all about.
It's an exciting time to be involved, that's for sure.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into liquidity pools. Until next time.